Dear friends, I'm glad you came, and I'm sure that you didn't came for me, but nevertheless, I'm glad that you came to Titulescu's house. In the last weeks we had very interesting debates on various subjects. We try to understand domestic policy in some of the major powers, major states, but also trends in foreign policy. We'll start very soon a series of conferences, roundtables on what we think the Romanian foreign policy should be in the next years, with some very interesting topics. We'll have time to discuss about that, but I'm sure that you will understand that in this complex global situation, a country like Romania has to have the necessary knowledge, the necessary wisdom to follow what happens in the major partners, especially in the United States. Perhaps we are tempted to concentrate on some classical issues. We might be tempted to follow what happens with the shield or with economic relations. But US foreign policy is changing direction, or at least nuances, from time to time. And that's why it is so important to understand the places where the centers of power are situated. I quoted in a recent speech something that I have learned on my blog from a TV series called, which is House of Cards. And it was something which I considered quite interesting. The fact that power was compared with real estate. The only thing which counts is location. Closer you are to the source, more valuable is your property or your status. Well, we'll see how in the United States, other countries, in Romania, we can understand the center of power, the real center of power, and how the game of power is conducted. Well, for this debate, we have a fantastic chance to have here someone who is almost half Romanian. Well, you know well, most of you, Kiki Skegan Munshi. You know her either from her experience, from her previous job in the American Library in Bucharest, or later on in the American Embassy. But you know that she worked in various places either in Asia or in Africa, in places quite different. She remained very fond of Romania and she continues to come here regularly. She wrote books on her favorite territories, on her favorite people and experiences, including in India or Romania recently, the interwar period. You have a self-portrait, a presentation on the leaflet that we prepared. I don't want to talk too long about Kiki, but let me say that I personally, I am very indebted to for her support on some of my experiences in writing about bilateral relations, Romanian-American relations. And I want to thank her in front of you for her support. I am as curious as you are to learn about US foreign policy, and especially that view from outside the Beltway. We are used to learn more about the official positions, to read statements or press communique. Today we have an excellent chance to learn about a view from outside the major official place outside the Beltway. Kiki, I stop here. I invite you to address your friends, our colleagues here. I'm sure that you would like to engage in a dialogue afterwards, and my colleagues, I'm sure, would like to ask you some comments, on some issues, to ask you about the subject, which is really very important, very interesting for us. Yes, you have it. Would you like to have this one, or do you want to use the other one?
I think I'd like to stand up.
Yeah.
Right? Is this one?
But let me see if it functions. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Domnule Năstase, doamnelor și domnilor, sper să mă iertați dacă duți în conferință românește. Nu prea mă descurc cu limba dumneavoastră în astfel în prezentare. Trec la englezește. I called this talk The View from Outside the Beltway because I wanted to make it a couple of things absolutely clear. Although I used to work for the U.S. Department of State and before that with the United States Information Service, I'm no longer with them, and I do not in any way represent the views of the government of the United States or of the American Embassy. This is a personal view from somebody who lives in the mountains of Southern California, Țărancă, dacă vrei, and reads and visits Romania quite often. During the Cold War, that is from the very famous telegram of George F. Kennan in 1946 until 1989, 1990, 1991, because the Cold War wasn't ended in a single blow, but over a series of events, the United States actually had a very well-known containment policy. It was to contain the Soviet Union, to try to keep it from making further gains, and eventually to defeat it, if you will, in its communist form, not altogether. Since the end of the Cold War, however, the United States has not had such an overarching strategy. It has not had the grand vision within which most foreign policy moves are made. In a very good article in the Hague Journal of Diplomacy that It actually said many of the things I believe in a better way. Former Ambassador Charles Freeman said this in 2011. In the post-Cold War era, the United States has yet to outline any principles, articulate any vision, or formulate any strategy for the reform of international institutions and practices, fiscal and monetary adjustments, or military retrenchment. In other words, we do not have the kind of broad framework for our foreign relations that Romania, when you were here, did. I remember that you said that Romania needed national security, economic development, and to advance the welfare of its people, which are broad goals, and Mr. Nastasi and other people have followed Romanian foreign relations within the framework of those broad goals. This lack of an overall strategy has shaped both foreign policy establishments and our foreign policy. And I thought that the best way to describe current American foreign policy was to try to outline how it is made, or in the event, not made. Here I have un mic oculire. I was in Iraq in 2006, serving on a forward operating base of the United States Army. And there are many very good things about the US Army. One of them I found was their ability to put things in a visual format. Therefore, I have tried to outline for you a bit about foreign policy. President Obama, with his advisors, including but not limited to the Pentagon, the CIA, the Department of State, and the National Security Administration, is concerned naturally with the very large, overarching, big problems of foreign policy. Iraq, Afghanistan, things that come up like Libya, right now, Syria. Probably he's focused on the Philippines and the terrible typhoon that took such an awful toll of life last week. This takes care of some of the very large issues, but there are two problems I'd like to bring your attention to in the way that these are addressed. The first has to do with the way in which people who present things to their boss want to get attention. You know, you say something to your superior and you try to say it in a way that will make him say, aha, that's interesting, very good point. So, what do you say? Well, there are two ways to do this. One is to tell him something that he agrees with, or to reinforce existing beliefs. And the other is to bring a big problem that you've noticed. So there is a kind of a shaping of what goes on and what is brought to the president's attention that most people, I think, don't even notice or think about, but is very important. And I would argue that it's very important in most institutions, and that the people who are the head of these institutions, whether they are small or large, need to be very aware of these tendencies in their subordinates. So here we have the top, the big issues, the really important things. Here we have the people. Generally, the people where I live are concerned about jobs, their neighbors, their kids, whether their children get into college, all of the things that ordinary people are concerned with. They're concerned with some international relations and foreign policy issues. Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously, because there are so many people who know soldiers in the army, who know people who have been there or are coming back there. Every week my church prays for the soldiers and for the military. That's important. They know about the big issues. They know about Syria. And I was amazed when I was looking up Vilnius, because before I came here, I had not known that there was going to be an important conference in Vilnius, right? even though I read the paper and I watch the news every day. So I looked it up on the internet, and the Secretary of State on September 6th was going to meet the Foreign Secretary in Lithuania, and they had a press conference on the plane. And the Secretary made a very bland announcement about what would happen in Vilnius, and then asked for questions from the reporters. Every single question was about Syria. Nothing. The only one about Russia was what would be Russia's position on Syria. That is, what was important was the media and how it would be received at home. And at home, nobody even knows where Vilnius is. They certainly can't spell it. And so you go immediately, if you're a reporter, to the hot issues. This is difficult for foreign policy and for an informed public. But you have to remember that the American public opinion is very important to the president and to the political parties. As Nixon said when he went to Poland, this visit will be a success only if I'm on primetime television. That is, a lot of it is made for that public through the press. So then who does make foreign policy? Well, it is the people in between. Congress has an important role because the Senate ratifies treaties, because the Senate ratifies nominations such as the non-existent nomination for an ambassador to Romania. And the Senate and the House of Representatives makes the budget, which funds the Department of State and the Pentagon and others. But the foreign policy is made through almost seeming many small other agencies, because foreign policy is so complicated, and most of the issues in our foreign policy are very small. Status and funding of refugee camps in Burundi and Tanzania, the U.S. military bases in Okinawa, the importation of bananas to the United States, fracking in the Romanian Dobrogea. These are decided in this middle area largely by smaller groups. And who are they? On the government agencies, they include but are not limited to the NSA, State Department, Pentagon, CIA, Justice Department, Drug and Enforcement Agency, FBI, Departments of Agriculture, Energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, the Border Patrol, Customs and Immigration. I could go on. But all of these have interests in U.S. foreign policy, and many of them have people in the American Embassy here. In many areas, embassies have more people from the other parts of the government than they have from the Department of State. On the other side, the decisions are influenced by interest groups. There are two broad kinds of interest groups. The not-for-profit NGO, such as trade unions, Sierra Club, Amnesty International, the American Association for Retired People. But the most important ones are the for-profit, multinational corporations. I believe that Chevron has a very large interest here in Romania, and if I had been Ponta, I might have mentioned to the representatives of Chevron that Romania thought that not having to pay for visas to the United States was a very important issue. I don't know whether he did or not, but that might have been one way to provide some influence. What does this mean, though, for American strategy? Well, Charles Freeman says, by definition, interest groups value their own agendas above those of others. They evaluate and approve, reject or amend each fragment of a proposed strategy in the light of its likely impact on the interests and causes that they espouse. They dismiss collateral damage to other national priorities as acceptable price of pursuing their own. This political dissection, disaggregation, and micromanagement of policy by interest groups deforms or defeats any effort to devise a coherent long-term grand strategy combining all the instruments of statecraft at the disposal of the United States. It composes a jumble of disconnected tactical decisions that masquerade as, but do not constitute, a strategy. In other words, our foreign policy is tremendously fragmented because it is pursued by a very fragmented set of actors. It is not a single foreign policy, and this is one of the kinds of things I have tried to communicate as I've talked to individual Romanians, because it isn't a matter of telling the Department of State or the embassy or Obama. It is much more complicated than that. How did it get this way? Well, it's of course rooted in history, and like most things historical, is complicated. In very brief, let us focus on two things. The first was articulated very well by Freeman, who blames in part the grand strategy of containment we applauded at the beginning of my talk. The policy of containment was a true grand strategy, integrating diplomacy, intelligence, military measures, and propaganda to ensure that the infirmities of the Soviet system would induce its ultimate collapse. The core judgment of the containment policy was that the power of our Soviet adversary was impervious to the logic of reason, but highly sensitive to the logic of force. Over time, this judgment became to be extended to the management of relations with countries other than the USSR. It established itself as the operative, if unexamined, presupposition underlying the formulation of US foreign policy. He's more authoritative than I am. Let me put it more simply. Foreign policy formulation, on the whole, migrated from the Department of State to the Pentagon. The first reaction that we have had with Libya, with Egypt, with Syria, with all of these various problems is, oh, do we want American boots on the ground, or shall we bomb them, or shall we stay out of it? It's not what kinds of foreign policy talking points, how do we use, how do we begin to approach this through diplomatic means. Freeman goes on to talk about how we gradually moved from diplomacy to militarism, with power, as I said, shifting strongly away from the Department of State to the Pentagon. The American military is superb at fighting wars. We're very, very good. We're not so good, or the military is not so good in other areas such as diplomatic strategy or reconstruction, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, but that's the subject of another talk. Ambassador Larry Pope agrees. In a speech at the University of Maine just last month, he said that over a decade and more of nation-building wars, a systemic imbalance has crept into our national security system, and two of our foreign policy institutions, the State Department and the Foreign Service, have continued to decline to the point of irrelevance. I'm not so sure we in the Foreign Service were entirely irrelevant, but we do know that the Pentagon has more money. The Pentagon has more people in its marching bands than we have Foreign Service officers in the Department of State. So we have an incoherent foreign posture centered, if it is centered any place, in the Pentagon and not where it should be, in my view, in the Department of State. Reinforcing this incoherence is technology, both the growing ease in travel and, most importantly, the communications revolution, which has allowed, among other things, us to access so much information that almost no one can absorb and deal with it all, and at the same time has allowed everybody the freedom to try and galvanize the whole world. Even our State Department, notoriously slow to change and adapt, is on the media, and this in turn gives rise to problems. Ambassador Pope noted that the State Department has taken to social media. The problem is that Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all the rest are individual expressions, while diplomacy requires speech on behalf of the state. According to a recent inspection report, State Department offices and bureaus have established more than 150 social media accounts, each one in the name of a component of the State Department. Nobody is responsible for ensuring that what is said on these Facebook pages and Twitter accounts is consistent with American policy. The State Department maintains 2 competing Persian language Facebook pages, and newly confirmed ambassadors now make YouTube videos. Our ambassador of Spain used his to introduce his 3 dogs to the Spanish people. So, what are we to do about this? Well, that's not entirely clear. The first issue is to define the problem and make it known. Then we turn to a solution, and perhaps this process has already started. Ambassador Freeman is in the end quite hopeful, given the real consequences of failure, real-world consequences of failure to redress the lopsided imbalances between the United States military and its diplomatic capabilities, including their intellectual underpinnings. A national effort to rebuild diplomatic doctrine and capacity is essential. The United States need not wait for a disaster to stimulate it to make this effort. Vision and leadership should suffice. There are signs that both may be in prospect. I sincerely hope he's right. And I also hope that now you at least will understand that when you begin to think, well, the United States objective in doing this is this, and begin to put things together in an almost conspiratorial way as to describe what the US is doing, generally that's not right. It is far more haphazard and much less coordinated than you may think. I thank you, and I hope that I have provoked some questions.
Thank you very much, Titi. I'm sure that you'll have questions about the fragmented American foreign policy, about the way the decisions are taken. I'm sure that in building a message or a strategy of foreign policy, you have to take into account various interest groups and their positions on various topics. It's very interesting to understand the way the Romanian foreign policy is built, how it's designed, which are those who are participating in creating the formal message. But you have a lot of other people, in a way or another, also influencing, sometimes even changing the direction of the official foreign policy. The tactical aspects, the positions on various topics. I can imagine that in the United States it's a lot more complicated, and I'm sure that it's not only a question of so many institutions, but so many groups with various interests, and the way the Congress is functioning, the way the committees are putting pressure on the State Department on various topics. We have seen, perhaps for the first time, the way a parliamentary commission, a parliamentary committee can function in an environment more tense on Russia, Montana. It was clear that we had also some participants from outside the Beltway who influenced a certain decision in the parliament on a domestic issues, of course, but I'm sure that on foreign policy also this can be discussed, and I'm sure that my colleagues would like to elaborate on that. So, who wants to take the floor? Yes, please.
Thank you for your short but very nice speech. I learned a lot, and I like it because this is the American way, not to give too many words, but words which count. Thank you very much. Now, was reading some of the booklets about you, that you are located now, you are retired and you live in California, close to San Diego. I used to be a Fulbright scholarship, I had a Fulbright scholarship with UCLA, and I made several trips to San Diego. It's a beautiful, beautiful journey, you know, to travel from San Diego to the Golden Gate, close to the ocean, and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, is beautiful. Now, I will ask about your speech something, but before that, I would like to tell you that I was impressed when I read that you published a novel. Last month, myself, even I am a very old man, I published with Amazon self-publishing a novel in 2 volumes. And one of my characters in my novel is called Tiki Peter. That means Tiki, but it is in Romanian. And after this meeting, I would like to ask you, maybe it's not polite, how would I arrange to be translated in English, because a lot of characters in my novel are American. Now the questions that I wanted to ask you about,
it was a rhetorical question.
About the foreign relations. I know that the future of Romania, the future of Romanians, even of my family, depends on the foreign policy of the United States. Now, by chance, when I was on the internet, I found the discussions of Ceausescu with Kissinger. And was all the discussions, I don't remember exactly the year, but I was impressed that Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, at that time he was the counselor, foreign relations counselor of Nixon president. Was not yet a Secretary of State. And he thanked many times Ceausescu for Romania's help to solve the relations of United States with China, and also to end the war in Vietnam. And also I was impressed because Kissinger said that he read a lot about Karl Marx, and I was amazed to know an American to say that he is an expert on Karl Marx. And now what I would like to ask you, because I see that you know a lot and you are a wise person, I would like to know if the fact that Romania helped the United States to solve its problem with China and also to end the war in Vietnam, does it count for the future relations of Romania with the United States? Will that help the Romanians? I mean, this is the question.
Okay. Thank you very much for your very focused question.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. In a word, not anymore. The United States was very grateful for the opening to China. It helped a great deal. It was useful, and it served Romania well at that time. But Americans have no sense of history. 6 months ago is historical, 5 years ago is forgotten, and 25 years ago, the favor that you did me 25 years ago is about as good as the favor your neighbor did you 25 years ago. Much more recent things have bearing on it. But at that time, it was very helpful, and we were very grateful to Romania. So thank you again for that help.
Ok. Manuela, were there? Immediately,
Sure, sorry. I read the brochure out my colleagues prepared, and I learned that you are working lately in Iraq. And I would be interested, because you spoke about shifting sometimes the power from the Department of State to the Pentagon. Could you share some of your experience in Iraq and what challenges did you face there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had a very rich experience in Iraq. I went to Iraq. I did not agree with our invasion of Iraq. I thought it was supremely stupid and without any basis. But they called for people to go and help in the reconstruction. It was something I had experience in and do, if I may say so, well. And I thought, this is a mess that my country made. I am an American. I will go to see what I can do. And I was not able to do much of anything. No, that's not true. We got some things done. And I saved the life of an 11-year-old boy, and perhaps that excuses my presence there, justifies my presence. Our reconstruction efforts in Iraq were on the whole a total mess. And I will be glad to outline that to you one-on-one if you would like to, but it really is the subject of another talk.
Okay. Domnul Ambassador,
thank you.
And I would like to say that anybody who would like to ask a question in Romanian, please feel free to speak Romanian. I understand I just can't speak so well formally.
Congratulations. If you accept the questions in Romanian, but I will put it in English. How do you think about the relationship between lobby and corruption in the foreign policy of the United States, especially in the economic field? Thank you.
That is an extremely interesting and a very good question, and it's not simply in relationship to foreign policy. On the one hand, lobbyists say, look, we represent the views of important groups of Americans about certain issues, and we should make these views known to Congresspeople. On the other hand, the amount of money that goes into the campaigns of Congresspeople from lobbyists effectively means that many of those senators and representatives are bought and paid for by the time they get to the Congress itself. I'm giving you the same answer I give Americans. I'm not changing it because you're a foreign audience. How you manage to restrain lobbying and this very bad effect of lobbying without restraining freedom of information or freedom of speech is a very difficult question. Probably at the base of it is restraining the amount of money that may be spent on political campaigns. Because some of our congressmen are probably corrupt. I don't think most of them are corrupt in the sense that they take money to vote a particular way. I think that they end up, in effect, being corrupt because they have campaign contributions from certain groups with certain types of views, and they know if they don't vote in that way, then they'll lose these contributions. It's very difficult. And thank you for that question. I hope I've answered it satisfactorily.
Thank you. Vă rog. Luați și vă rog un microfon, da?
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting and I enjoyed every minute of it. I have one remark to make. Out of the government agencies which are listed on the screen, FCC is not present. And
I just forgot it.
I hope so, because that is one of the agencies which is slapping the media over the wrist when they go above the line, and it should also slap the wrist of the media when it goes beyond the line. And I'm referring to the sort of blackout about Libya. We heard a lot of it from the American media of what happened there, but now reports from that area are not so numerous. And that is quite contradictory because things are happening and they are so dramatic. This is just a remark. But the question refers to the role of the private security firms in influencing the American foreign policy. Because it is quite obvious, and several remarks in the literature about these firms establish a connection between these, the management of these firms and the State Department and the Pentagon. Obviously, they are not official, but these sort of relations still exist. Thank you.
Thank you. I would actually like to address your first remark. I have to say that the list on that slide is not definitive. I just sat down and started putting things down simply to give you an idea of how many different agencies had some role in foreign policy and some influence over it. And the lack of it, actually, Libya is still very much in the American press because of Benghazi and the unfortunate death of Ambassador Chris Stevens. And that is solely a reflection of using Benghazi as a political weapon against President Obama, led by a congressman named Darrell Issa. And it is almost a witch hunt. So it is there, but it also, the absence in perhaps the press you see is the reflection of the fickle nature of the attention of the American public. And the journalists are catering to that nature and to the American public rather than covering everything in a broad way that is important for the American public to know. That is, it is the public desire which shapes the information they get in large part. Oh dear, now I've forgotten your second question.
The role of the private security firms.
Okay, the role of the private security firms. I've not thought about the private security firms. I had actually Blackwell defending me in Iraq for a while. And if I had been an Iraqi driver, when my convoy went past, I would have gone home and gotten an AK-47 to shoot the Americans. They were so rude. I think possibly, I don't know. I would guess that it's possibly the same as any other important industrial group that wants to get money. But could you elaborate why you're asking this question? I'm curious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because some of the managers of these companies, yes. Because some of the companies and some of the people managing these companies have very close relations with the State Department, with Pentagon. Some of them are former employees of the two departments. So the relation is there. And obviously, they act and they do things which the government doesn't want necessarily to be involved in. Thank you.
Well, the private security firms are there to guard Americans in various places. And that's part of the role of influence that, that happens when you've got that happens in a government where people are allowed to go out and join business almost immediately after they stop working for government, such as the, what is the Fundacja Nacionala that Wittgenstein joined? The national, the restitution agency that Wittgenstein. Fondo Proprietatea. And technically, they're not supposed to, for at least 5 years, and if they've contracted with people like that, not for the rest of their working life, but it happens at a certain level, not at my level. But I don't know whether you're trying to imply that the private security firms do more than protect Americans or not, or whether they're, are you talking about the drones and acting like a CIA, yeah. It's part of this whole government industry nexus, which is driving part of foreign policy, and centered often around the Pentagon, more than the State Department. And I deplore it, but I'm not sure how to end it. And I don't think that there is a specific role beyond that, but you may know more than I do, because as I said, I have not thought of that particular aspect.
I think it's also connected with the military industry. putting pressure for certain directions, certain decisions in foreign policy.
It's also connected with something. I blame Edgar Snowden on the Republicans. Now, let's be clear. I'm a Democrat. I'm biased. But the Republicans insisted on making the American government smaller. And one of the results was that instead of hiring American government people to do certain kinds of jobs, they contracted them out, which is why a private individual working on a highly sensitive area in the NSA, like Edgar Snowden, was working for a private firm. He was not a US government employee. They're also contracting out the security clearances for people like Edgar Snowden. So, and the private security firms are part of that.
It's much expensive.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Dacă este cineva, poate că are deja microfonul.
Thank you, Professor Nicholas.
Și politica externă e foarte importantă aici instrument.
Dr. Monshi, first of all, I have to apologize for not being able to attend your presentation, but one has to work in order to put food on the table.
What a shame.
You are the only one.
I know, but I'm sorry, I apologize. My question would be... Thank you. My question would be, given the fact that you've been an American diplomat, posted for almost 2 decades, if I understood correctly, in Romania? No.
Over the course, I first came to Romania in 1983, but I left in 87.
Oh, I see.
And I came back as a diplomat in 2000. And then I left in 2002 because I'd gotten married, and my husband seemed to think I ought to come and live with him.
Oh. Well, what an old-fashioned idea. The question was, what is your opinion about, how should I put it, the one-sided attitude, the one-sided take of the American embassy in Bucharest towards Romanian domestic foreign policy during Ambassador Gutenstein's tenure, which seems to be continued by the present DCM, and sort of an annex to this one. Do you have any information about when we'll get a new American ambassador here instead of a DCM? Thank you very much.
Okay, the present DCM I've known for some time, and I would like to accept him from my remarks. And I do not know that there has been no ambassador nominated by the White House to date for Romania. Romania is not alone in this. There are lots of countries that are without an ambassador. I am speaking totally as a private individual. I think Ambassador Gutenstein's public remarks on the Romanian political scene were uncalled for, undiplomatic, and reprehensible. He should not have mixed up in the country's private affairs publicly. I mean, let's face it, we do behind closed doors, but it should, that's where it belongs. I actually wrote a column I write a column for our small local paper, and I actually wrote a column on it after a taxi driver started complaining to me about Gutenstein and he was Romanian. Yeah, I know, it was here in Bucharest. It was here in Bucharest. No, nobody in the United States knows Gutenstein's name, or in fact, whether Budapest or Bucharest is the capital of Romania, let's be honest.
It's just a difference of 2000.
Yeah, well, it's easy to confuse, and there are a lot of countries out there, you know, to remember. So, but no, I think that the tendency to make this kind of interference and these kinds of remarks about a country's internal affairs, I'm not quite sure why it's come up here. I actually did a small poll of the Foreign Service officers that I'm still in touch with. Some of them retired, and I asked them whether they knew of anything similar. And India, no. Pakistan, no. Kosovo, yes. Iraq, yes. China, no. I don't know what led Wittgenstein to do this. I do know that he was not the first ambassador to make remarks about Romanian internal affairs. I believe that was Michael Guest, and who said, instead of saying corruption is a bad thing, he said essentially Romanian corruption is bad. And, you know, it's a subtle difference, but there is a difference that should be maintained. Wittgenstein was not a diplomat. This was, as many of you know, a consolation prize for Wittgenstein because he was first nominated. He wanted to be the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or not the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the head of the government agency that deals with the chambers of commerce, but because he was a lobbyist for the Chamber of Commerce, he was disqualified. So he got Bucharest because he had Romanian connections.
Or because we are not so important to have.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And a couple of questions. First, how are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Second, you mentioned Vilnius. Vilnius is very important within the next 2 weeks. A brief history of Vilnius tells us that within the last 10 years, the Westerners, whatever they tried to do in Vilnius, they lost. It happened in 2003 with the V10, the participants in Iraq, and then it proved to be a big mess. Then in 2007, President Basescu acted as a broker in Vilnius for Nabucco, the pipeline, and there is no. Now we are waiting for Vilnius 29 of November. And Vilnius 29 November, it's actually the Shakespearean dilemma about Ukraine, to the west or to the east. We will see. But this is not the point. Let's stay with U.S. foreign policy. I believe that Ukraine was the biggest U.S. foreign policy investment in the last 10 years in Eastern Europe. And now it comes my question. How come that all of a sudden on that plane, Mr. Kerry said absolutely no words about America's biggest foreign policy investment in the last 10 years in Eastern Europe, which is Ukraine? I hardly can admit that he doesn't have an opinion. I hardly can admit that the US doesn't have a position. And if the US has a position, or had a position, it could not be a third position. It's either with Brussels or with the reset. What's your opinion?
I think that the reset with Russia is very important to the United States. I do think that it is probably a core objective of our foreign policy that does not get into the newspapers and into the popular media. That's one thing, and that's irrespective of what Mr. Kerry did or did not do. I do not know Mr. Kerry well. I did meet him one time in Iraq. He came to our forward operating base, and I've got to say that I was in Bakuba. It was a very violent time. Coming to our base was not easy, and it was not safe. And he only came with one person. High marks for that, instead of a whole entourage. They probably refused to let the entourage onto the helicopter, but we'll leave that aside. But our colonel and I were giving him a briefing, and our province reflected the breakdown of Sunni and Shia in Iraq, and we were very important in illustrating what the larger problems were. So it was a very good briefing. In the middle of it, Mr. Kerry interrupted Colonel Jones and turned to me and said, "Kiki, how do we end this war?" Just like that. And I said, Mr. Senator, I'm sorry, I can't tell you in a sound bite. And he was not happy, but that's what he wanted. And my belief is that probably on this plane, he was responding to the reporters because it was more important to respond to the reporters than to step back and say, wait a minute, I need to convey this message, not that message.
I have one more question, please.
It reminds me of this beautiful movie, The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is in 3 series, 1, 2, and 3. At the end of the Hobbits needed 3 series movie to finish Sauron. Do you think, and I'm sure that you remember my theory is Obama plus. Obama plus meaning probably the Democrats need another term. The third one from 2016 to 2020, hopefully to finish Sauron, the hardliners reps. What do you think? How important should be for the Democrats to keep the White House another mandate after 2016 in order to finish and to launch the engine of their, let's call it flatly, social reforms?
The Lord, I read the books, I didn't see the movie. There were 3 volumes, so that may be why there were 3 movies. I'm not so sure it's that important. I think what's most important is that we regain a more centrist core to our political system instead of having a wild right and a less vocal, less united, but also somewhat hysterical left. We need to be able to come together and to talk reasonably about common problems to which we may have different approaches. That's okay. But what we need to do is to address our problems and the problems of this world together rather than yell at each other and use everything as a political weapon rather than as a means to a solution for something that is, frankly, worse. I hope we Democrats get a 3rd term, but that's personal.
It's a very interesting question about Ukraine. And, well, I'm sure that Ukraine will come out again as a very serious target in a certain dispute with Russia. It started, and Vilnius will tell us how serious it is. Of course, for Kerry, in my opinion, well, the Ukrainian voters are not so important at this stage, but well, they are important in the United States, I'm sure. Anyway, we'll see very soon if they will sign or not.
One of the things I did forget to mention in my talk was that as you look at people's influence on foreign policy, the influence of Americans of groups of various origins is tremendously important. Right now, Hispanic Americans are almost the swing vote for everything. The Polish Americans, the Irish Americans, I don't think there are many Ukrainian Americans, not so many. And the Romanian Americans can't agree on anything. So there isn't much of a pressure group there.
I was military in my youth, now I am from trade unions. I have some short questions. Concerning the American foreign policy, what's new about Joe Biden? Because I don't see the vice president there.
I think, there are more people in Romania who are concerned about Joe Biden than there are in the United States. And I'm not quite sure
The second president.
what it is. Usually the vice president is decorative. Now, Joe Biden has been actually very useful to President Obama in politicking for him with Congress and in trying to support him. And I hear a lot about his role in foreign policy here, but I've heard nothing in the United States, so I can't really answer that question.
Thank you. I have another question, very dangerous. E nevoie de câteva explicații în limba română. Am dreptul să o pun, deoarece în perioada alegerilor din Statele Unite am reprezentat singura instituție din România care a făcut propaganda pentru Obama, care a mers, a luat legătura cu toți românii din Statele Unite, cu organizațiile lor, pe ideea Obama înseamnă pace, românii înseamnă război, votați Obama. Moscova ne-a întrebat, de ce? Pentru că am admirat inteligența cu care Putin l-a sprijinit pe Obama. În clipa în care Putin a spus să-l sprijinim pe Romney, toți americanii au fugit să-l voteze pe Obama. În această situație, în noaptea alegerilor, am fost a treia voce din lume pe internet care l-a felicitat pe Obama pentru victorie. The next question is, the universal traitor, Ion Mihai Pacepa, said and wrote that Senator John Kerry is a KGB agent, and the President Obama too. What's your opinion? Is it true? What's your opinion about Pacepa?
And do you believe everything that Mr. Pacepa says?
Nothing. Because for me, he's just a trick. Don't forget this. And also in Romania, we hope something. That the President Obama give us a real ambassador. The last one said, bucurați-vă că nu se trage în voi de pe blocuri ca în Siria. In the name of democracy. Thank you.
I also hope that Romania gets a real ambassador and a good ambassador. A professional. I will make sure that our embassy, at least, and the State Department is told about this. They will probably pay absolutely no attention to me because they don't choose the ambassadors, really. They choose certain ones of them, but basically it's the White House. I like Mr. Obama very much. Well, I don't want to leave my mountains that long. Although I'd love to come here with somebody else paying the airplane ticket. I like Mr. Obama very much personally. His heart is in the right place. He's a very intelligent man. I am not impressed with his management of foreign affairs. I'm not sure that he is the one managing foreign affairs. I'm not even sure it's Mr. Biden who's more managing foreign affairs. I think that foreign affairs is managed by interest groups more than anything else, and that is one of the reasons it's so hard to know exactly what the United States wants or is going to do.
Well, any other question? Yes,
Kiki, you spoke about different groups behind. Now, again, tell me from your experience, does it happen sometimes? It was a total confusion in the final decision concerning external affairs in the US government. So, let's say that the one side made that decision because they listened to them, and the other one did another one. So a really controversial decision. It would be nice to hear something. Everybody can make mistakes.
This may have happened. I don't know of any specific issues where it has, but it could easily have, with so many voices coming in, there are times when it's a little confusing about exactly what U.S. policy is going to be. When I was press attaché in India, I was asked to we were asked to write and place articles saying that genetically modified foods were no danger and Monsanto came and gave us a lot of briefings. And then some NGOs from the United States came and asked that we not write the articles. Well, eventually we had to say we get our orders from the State Department, go there, but it can be very confusing.
Well,
good evening. When we were raised in early 70s in school, we learned that most of the values that the U.S. do profess were named at that time white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. What is the impact of the cultural shift, especially for a person like yourself living in California, with the changes in demographics, with the advent of the Hispanic world progressing towards north, and how is that going to change the U.S. policy going forward?
That's an excellent question. How the United States was settled and generally formed by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Northwest European, and subsequent waves of people from Eastern Europe and from Southern Europe did not, frankly, change this that much. We are now seeing a lot of Hispanic Americans who tend to be honest, hardworking, trying to get ahead in almost the same way that that my ancestors did when they came. And so I'm not seeing that many changes. At the same time, it will have an impact because we're getting more and more people from countries where, for instance, it is more important to hire your cousin than to hire the best person for the job because you have to be responsible to the family rather than to the firm. You know, there are kinds of things like that which may have an impact. I've not yet seen it. I think that we're having greater social impact from things like internet and means and changes in telecommunications and in the fact that we no longer have a West to go to for people who don't like being where they are than the immigration patterns. But all of this is yet to be seen. It's one of the most important questions that we face, probably, but I don't have the answers.
Any other questions? No. Well, I'm sure that your next decision would be to attend the launching of my book on the 23rd of November. And at the book fair, Saturday at 1 o'clock. Romanian-American relationship, partnership, and I'm giving a certain view about American ambassadors to Romania, about relations between Romania and the United States, of course, my views, my experiences. But for today, I would like to emphasize something very, very important. It's a shift in American foreign policy as I see it. The fact that Europe, which was the main target, the main area of interest for the United States after the Second World War, is no more a priority. If you take into account the visits of the President, the fact that well, Asia is more important, or Middle East, or Africa, or it was at a certain moment South America, which is normal. But Europe becomes less and less important. Romania, as a European country, less and less important. And you have, well, a kind of relationship, a special relationship between the American ambassador, which by chance was not designated to be sent here, and the Vice President of the United States. They work together. It's a personal relationship, and that's why the message is built, the relationship is built, the analysis is made. But it's not something that I would consider from a strategic point of view in terms of Romania being a kind of a proxy in a special global game or in a special relationship taking into account the developments in Russia or in Turkey or relationship with Poland, the kind of non-fragmented foreign policy towards Eastern Europe or Central Europe. Well, it's not very clear for me if the United States has a clear position on Vilnius. I don't think so. I don't think that Vilnius is a priority for the American foreign policy. It seems to be a little bit important for European Union, but I'm not so sure, because the Eastern Partnership is less important than the Southern Partnership, and the Southern powers in Europe are more interested in the Mediterranean than in the Black Sea and the Eastern countries. And I don't think that they would like to generate a certain tension with Russia at this point, because there are other topics which seem to be more important, Syria and Middle East, of course. That's why I'm not very optimistic about Vilnius. Of course, Ukraine is a very important area, a very important target, but it seems to be more important from Germany, for Germany or for European countries, even if they also for Germany perhaps it's not so important to make the Russians very nervous about this subject. That's why I'm not among those who are very optimistic about the outcome. Even if something very special might be the result, well, the signing of the treaty with Ukraine and initialing the treaty with Moldova. There are things important, but well, you can see that it is like a novel of Agatha Christie. Well, the small people are disappearing one by one, and from the 6 initial partners, well, only Ukraine and Moldova remain. Georgia is not very clear. Belarus is gone. Well, Armenia also. So I don't think that Vilnius will be a breakthrough. So coming back to the American foreign policy, well, I think that the priorities are different from what we considered as being essential. Well, in the 90s, when the United States understood that Eastern Europe might be very important in eliminating a kind of a buffer zone towards the Soviet Union. But now, of course, the things are a little bit changed. Russia became a partner, and well, we'll see what will come. But well, I just wanted to have your comments on that.
I'd like to respond to that in 2 parts. The first is, I have no idea what the American policy toward Vilnius is. I wasn't able to find anything on the internet, and as I said, before I came here, I didn't even know that Vilnius was going to happen. That might not be bad, because sometimes it's easier in our country to pursue a policy if the media attention's not on it. So there may be a very good policy, a very strong policy that we simply don't know about. And believe me, if the media attention were on it, it would be buffeted around and would probably be impossible to do anything. The second is that we forget here in Europe that the United States is between 2 oceans, and on one side of the Atlantic is Europe, and on the other side of the Pacific is all of Asia, which is tremendously important to us. This is the first conference I've been in that I can remember where nobody's asked me about Yalta or complained about Yalta. So, and I remember that one of the things no Romanian seems to remember is that when the armistice was signed in Europe, we were fighting in the Pacific and fighting very hard and losing a lot of people, and it was still very difficult for us. So that our turning attention to the Pacific, to China, to India, to Indonesia, to all of those countries is really probably a natural balance. And it takes us away from our heritage, which is the Anglo-Saxon Europe. But now our heritage is increasingly Asian as well, because it's not just Hispanic Americans, it's Chinese Americans, it's Americans of Indian origin, etc., who provide this great patchwork that is the United States. So I think that inevitably Europe is going to decline relative to other areas of the world for the United States, as I think the United States will decline for Romania relative to other areas of the world. You know, maybe a good thing.
We'll see who will be the next president. In Romania, I mean.
Yeah, oh yeah. Vote early, vote often, as Mayor Daley said.
Okay, dear friends, dear colleagues, I hope that you enjoyed this debate, this dialogue. It was an excellent opportunity to learn about the American foreign policy, the interest groups which are influencing the American foreign policy, but also to learn more about Kiki. Because even if some of you know her since the 80s, well, I am sure that you learn a lot. No one asked about the horses.
Oh, cei doi cai români.
Da, pe care are la ferma, la ferma din Statele Unite. But I'm sure that they will read your novel in Romanian.
I hope so.
Yeah, very soon. Well, it's ready. The translation was made, is ready, and the book might appear shortly. So once again, dear friends, thank you very much. Dear Kiki, thank you for being with us. I'm sure it was a very pleasant event. We are waiting for you every time that you come to Bucharest. And I hope that you'll invite us at your farm sometime. To have a Țuică, yeah.
Luăm cu noi și un hoț de care.
Da. Stai grijă. Okay.
Să ai grijă, we shoot horse thieves.
Vă mulțumesc foarte mult încă o dată. Ne vedem. Nu uitați, mâine discutăm despre cealaltă mare putere, discutăm despre Rusia, cu Viorica Măisuc și despre tezaur. Așa că nu pierdeți ocazia să veniți mâine la ora 16. Mâine la ora 4, da. Viorica Măisuc, cartea ei despre politica externă rusă.